Well, I thank you very much for the invitation, and hopefully you can see me above the table. I'm probably a little bit shorter than most. Asking me to talk about Listeria in 15 minutes is really kind of hard for me, so I will do this as quickly as I possibly can. So what we're going to be doing is a whirlwind discussion about Listeria. When I started working back in 1985, Listeria was just recognized as a foodborne disease. Since that time, we've understand a little bit more about where it's coming from, but still what we're concerned about is the fact that it has very high level of hospitalizations and relatively high mortality rates. Even though we've made a lot of progress in reducing the number of cases of listeriosis over the years, there's still going to be a susceptible population. And the information that we have right now is that over 50% of the listeriosis cases do not come associated with pregnancy, but rather with older individuals. And I'm going to be one of those that's going to be fitting into that demographic. It's predicted that by 2030 in the United States, 21% of the US populations will be in that higher risk category just by age, as well as the fact that 3% will be on immunosuppressive drugs. Now, take that in consideration also with the pregnancies and other immunocompromising diseases. We're looking at about 30% of our population that will be of a problem. Now, one other thing that we've noticed in the last 10 years or so is the fact that by the use of the whole genome sequencing, we are able to detect smaller outbreaks, and also from that have been able to detect some unusual type of food products associated with this. In 2022, there was another risk assessment that was identified that if we could remove products that have more than 1 colony-forming units per gram, we could reduce the cases almost substantially, almost to 100%. However, how realistic is that going to be? In most countries, there's still going to be a tolerance that's based off of food products that will not support growth of having 100 colony-forming units per gram. Canada has been tweaking their policy, and still, once again, if you've got a food product that is going to have a low pH of a 4.4 or less, low water activity of 0.92 or less, or certain kinds of combinations, or if the products are frozen, that they will have a tolerance for Listeria. However, what they have noticed is that they have a special zero tolerance for food products that are designed specifically for vulnerable populations, once again, for those that are going to be potentially older. Now, when we take a look at the fact that we're looking at a no-growth situation, we have to understand that some of the emerging threats come from food products that don't support growth under their ideal storage conditions. So in some of the cases we've seen with frozen diced chicken breast, with ice cream, with frozen vegetables, and even though they don't support growth, the fact that they still had some Listeria and then they were used in a food product that was stored for longer periods of time under refrigerated conditions, and from there was able to support growth and did cause illness. So when we look at this, we can't exclude all food products as being necessarily safe or unsafe. So one way we can do is by taking a look at how we're going to be controlling in the environment. So for food products that don't support growth, it doesn't give you carte blanche that you can have Listeria. So we are going to still have somewhat of a very restrictive environmental policy for food products that are ready to eat. And in the United States, we are going to be trying to focus on primarily, first of all, the non-food contact services, so zones 2 and 3. If we can control them there, we're more likely to ensure that it's not going to be in food contact surfaces or in the finished product. Now, this gets to be also complicated because if we're looking at Listeria species, what are those defined at? When I started working at, it was Listeria monocytogenes, which is still the pathogenic strain, plus another 5 species along with that. Since 2009, we have included, added additional Listeria species that now we're up to 28 species. So what are you going to be doing the testing for? So when you're going to be finding a positive, you're still going to be reacting by having rigorous cleaning and sanitation and increased testing. However, what defines Listeria species? So more recently, they've looked at 2 different kinds of classifications, identified as being Listeria sensu stricto and sensu lato. And what we're trying to determine at the time that we got this information right now is which set of things do we have to look at for our environmental testing. And the consensus is at this point is that we're looking at the sensu stricto. These are the Listeria strains that not only include the monocytogenes, but also an additional 9 index strains that are going to have similarities in being able to be picked up by the same detection methods, and you should be able to confirm whether or not they're going to be in the environment. Now, the sensu lato, even though they might come from some cultural methods as being Listeria-like, they have limited value as indicator organisms where Listeria monocytogenes might be present. And there's actually proposals to reclassify these as non-Listeria species. Now, if you're going to be doing this in a food production plant and you say, well, are we really concerned about these? Well, part of it is that a lot of the newer systems, the PCR, and those that are going to be based off of motility or the immuno-based assays that rely on flagellal proteins, they won't pick them up. So if you end up missing them, it's probably not a big deal. So once again, what we're going to be looking at is trying to look at the sensu stricto ones. Now, we can't necessarily keep them out of the environment 100% of the time. They will occur. So what we're looking at is what can we do to reduce the number of illness or number of Listeria that might be in a particular food product. In a number of years ago, Canada and FDA went together and looked at risk assessment for soft cheeses. And in the United States, we still have a 60-day aging requirement for food product or for cheese products if you're making it with raw milk. What they looked at, the evidence, is that even though that it seems to be reasonable for a hard cheese, if you're having a soft cheese, it's actually counterproductive in the fact that you actually would have Listeria that's going to grow during that 60-day aging. So the recommendation was that you're going to be trying to focus on having at least a 3-log reduction of Listeria in that milk so that you're going to help for the management. What we had for one of our graduate students, she went through all the data and tried to figure out what would be appropriate D and Z values for milk products. And what she found out is that there was a big variety of D and Z values depending upon how the experiments were set up, what strains of Listeria they were going to have, and she ended up coming out with a predictive model and then doing validation on her own. From there, developed a thermization app. And this can be found on our website. And what it is a pull-down menu where you choose what is the pathogen of choice. In this case, is Listeria monocytogenes. How many log reduction that you want to have. In this case, it's going to be a 3-log reduction. And then decide what temperature you want to heat or thermize the milk and how long you need to do it. So this is a sliding scale. Unfortunately, it's for degrees Fahrenheit. You'll have to do a little bit of a calculation with this. However, what it shows in this case is if you're having artisan cheesemaker that's going to have a bat pasteurization, if they can hold it at basically 61 degrees Celsius for about 4.8 minutes, that would give a 3-log reduction. But they have some flexibility. So if they want to have a higher temperature, it's a shorter period of time. And because it's an app that's available on the web, it can be used on a smartphone or a tablet. It's something that can be easily used by an artisan cheesemaker. Now, even though that was done for milk, we need to take a look at what kind of other thermal processing will you need for other types of food products. And with the advent of more plant-based analogs, particularly for dairy, what we took it upon ourselves was trying to determine, are we going to have the same D and Z values regardless of what that dairy product or dairy analog product was going to be? So we ended up taking a pea protein analog and had 2 different water activities of 0.95 and a 0.98, 2 different pHs of 4.8 and 5.2, and ran the D and Z values with that, and then compared it with other results that we have for a cream cheese analog, which is 30% fat, and then also with a processed cheese with a 30% fat, and all the pea protein ones were 23% fat. So what we found out, lower water activity, longer D values, lower pH, shorter D values. However, when we do the comparison with that and taking a look at a cream cheese that has similar type of water activity, but maybe a little bit difference in pH, we see that the dairy product has substantially higher D values than what it is for the analog. When we take a look at the processed cheese, however, even though they had very similar pHs and water activity values, we find out that the processed cheese was actually shorter D values. The hypothesis with that is with the processed cheese, it has another chemical, it has an emulsifier in it, and that chemical may actually sensitize it. So the bottom line story with this is that when you're going to be looking at creating thermal processing parameters, you have to make sure that it's appropriate for that particular food product. Another thing is looking outside the box is disinfection of brine. So we use brine to add salt to cheeses as well as potentially cool down meat products. And one suggestion is by using something called slightly acidic electrolyzed water. The pH is going to be between a 5 and a 6.5. And basically what it is a piece of equipment that uses the brine, the salt within that, and it generates a hypochlorous acid as well as other reactive species, and it kills Listeria immediately. This is approved for use by the FDA and USDA and is used commercially in the meat industry. Now, if you still do have survivors in there, you need to be able to inhibit the growth of it. And what we're seeing in this particular case is examples with a model soft cheeses. And we had 4 different acids: citric acid, lemon juice, lactic acid, which is predominant acid in most cheeses, acetic acid, which is vinegar, and propionic acid, which is found from propionic bacteria. As we can see from the upper left-hand corner, that even at a pH of a 5.25, which is the green line, we still have Listeria growth with it. Once we use acetic acid or propionic acid, even at a pH of 5.75, we had no growth of Listeria. Now, with lactic acid, you can see by the blue lines that at a pH of 5.5, it depended upon what kind of moisture there was, but there was some inhibition. Now, we can use that information to then look at other types of clean label antimicrobials. So cultured sugar potentially is the source of lactic acid. Vinegar is the source of acetic acid. And what we're showing in here is meat product, where we had the black line is going to be the control with a pH of a 6.3. The next red line was a similar pH but had 2% cultured sugar vinegar in it. And then the bottom line is going to be a similar thing with cultured sugar vinegar, but a pH of a 5.5 with citric acid. We saw on the previous slide that pH 5.5 by itself was not going to be inhibitory. And here, where we put in the combination of the lactic acid, the acetic acid, as well as the lower pH, we can see by the red dotted line, we had no growth at all for the 12-week period. So once again, trying to utilize our multiple hurdles in order to inhibit growth. So as summary for emerging trends, we have an increasing number of susceptible individuals. Whole genome sequencing does detect smaller outbreaks. And we do have things that are complicated because we're identifying other non-pathogenic Listeria species that can be used for environmental controls. Ultimately, we are going to be looking to control growth. However, just because a food product doesn't support growth does not mean it's off the hook. And so we need to think outside the box and potentially reformulate foods to inhibit growth. So with that, I used up my time. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Kathy. We've got time for a question or two.
Yes?
Thank you, Kathleen.
Hear me now?
Thank you very much. One of the important points you made is that it's important to understand the design of the product, but possibly also the use or misuse of the product. I think the latter was not necessarily in what you said, but the design is very important. But I think where we lack some knowledge. We know what the design should be and how we maybe manufacture then certain products for a certain application and purpose for consumers, but we don't always understand how consumers creatively could use some of the products we put on market. So when our design says it would be not support the growth of Listeria, they could come up with applications that do support growth of Listeria. How do we manage that?
How do we manage that? You need to know your consumer a lot more. And we've had some very spirited discussions with the frozen food industry, and they said, why should we be concerned about that? People should cook their vegetables. We have it on the label that you must cook it. But I've got family recipes that doesn't do that. So you do need to know what the consumer does and take into consideration with that. So that's all. Know your consumer. Yeah.
Hi there. Great talk, thank you. I have a question for you. So occasionally...
Okay, I have a hard time hearing, so...
Okay. Occasionally you see media and recalls for product Listeria that you wouldn't naturally think would grow Listeria. So here I have one organic pineapple chunks recall because of Listeria concerns. Now, obviously pineapple has a low pH.
Okay.
Would you think that we're now finding more emerging facts about where Listeria grows, or maybe sometimes we're quite risk averse?
So I didn't quite hear all the words, but Listeria growth, yes, you still, I still, number one thing is trying to prevent it from growing. That will reduce your potential cases of it. But I think that, as we were talking about there, you need to understand how that food product is going to be used. I think that, the 100 CFU per gram at the point of consumption still makes sense for general things, but it's the lower we go, the better off we're going to be, because we don't know what our susceptible consumers are going to be. So, I don't know.
Thank you very much. I think we've better call it quits there, but there was an amazing amount of information you presented in a very short time, Kathy, and pH and thermal depth of Listeria is a very complex topic, and I'll discuss this with you later on. So, thank you very much.